focus on the first 5 verses of the lesson this morning. I was told a long time ago that every text has at least 10 sermons in it, and the role of a preacher is not to try to preach all 10 on the same Sunday. So I'm just focusing in on that first section. So may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable unto you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. There's a story about Albert Einstein, that brilliant physicist of the 20th century that was also a professor at Princeton University. Einstein was traveling from Princeton by train. When the conductor came by to punch the passengers' tickets, Einstein couldn't find his. So he looked in his vest pocket, he looked in his pants pockets, he looked in his briefcase, couldn't locate it, so the conductor was very gracious. He said, "Not to worry, Dr. Einstein. I know who you are. We all know who you are, and I'm sure you bought a ticket." So as the conductor moves down the aisle, he looks back and he notices that Einstein is still fussing around, eventually goes underneath the train seat to look. So the conductor comes back and says, Dr. Einstein, don't worry. I know who you are. You don't need a ticket. I'm sure you bought one. With that, Einstein gets up and says, "Young man, I too know who I am. What I don't know is where I am going." It's the second Sunday of Easter. As I just said, Easter is a season of the church year, not just a day. We proclaimed He is risen last week. But what exactly does this mean? Not just in some kind of ultimate sense, but day to day. Where are we going? Throughout the coming weeks of Easter, I'd like for us to think about this together. What does it mean to live in the light of the resurrection? What does it mean to be Easter people? Questions regarding this new identity evidently plagued the disciples in our gospel reading as well. The scene is the first day of the week in the evening. And like the confused Dr. Einstein, the disciples also have no clue as to next steps. They were gathered together, that much we're told, but their hearts are laced with fear. The doors were locked. They wanted no visitors, no limelight. They were overwhelmed, no doubt, unsure how to process all that had just happened. There must have been grief. Their leader had been brutally executed. Maybe fear of further retaliation. I can well imagine there were other emotions swirling around in that room as well, all of which contributed to their trepidation. Oh, maybe some resentment might have been in that fearful mix. I mean, if only Jesus had played his cards a little differently, maybe he would still be around. But I suspect even more unsettling might have been some guilt. For I'll bet the disciples realized in their heart of hearts, as Jesus' closest followers, that they had let him down. I read a statement this week made by Garrison Keillor that I think describes that situation in the upper room disturbingly well. We always have a backstage view of ourselves. An audience sees a neatly arranged scene, but behind the curtain lies all sorts of things hidden from view. Old failures, hurts, guilt, shame. For behind the curtain of undying loyalty the disciples had professed to Jesus, the backstage was kind of messy. Jesus had told them not to draw their swords when he was arrested, but they did. He implored them to stay awake as he prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, but they couldn't. He called them to follow him all the way to the cross, but they denied him, both tacitly and overtly. Only a few women stood vigil all the way through the crucifixion, not the 12. And bottom line is, nobody really stepped up and went forward to do anything to change the course of events. And the disciples surely didn't know what to do now. So yes, their fear was no doubt a complicated and paralyzing emotional state. And they were locked in it. But into the midst, Jesus comes. He understands the disciples' fear and confusion. He knows of their guilt and their anemic faith. And what does he say? Do you remember? Where were you last Friday? Is this what you call following? I told you I'd go away. I told you I'd come back. And yet here you are hiding up here? Such remarks would have been reasonable. But Jesus doesn't say anything of the sort. Instead, he utters 4 simple words. Peace be with you. Peace be with you. In other words, set your hearts and your minds at rest. I'm not here to criticize. I'm not here to chastise. I'm not here to expose your weaknesses. You can see my hands and my side and know how much I have suffered, but do not fear, for I am with you. The past is forgiven, and it is time to begin anew. I'm here to show you and compel you to share the way of peace. Peace. Eirene in Greek, shalom in Hebrew. And the word implies so much more than absence of war, doesn't it? We experience it as safety, harmony, contentment, acceptance. And it's the first thing Jesus says to the fearful disciples as the risen one. And he connects it in particular with the acts of receiving and offering forgiveness. To be forgiven and in turn forgive. For did you notice? Immediately after Jesus brings peace to their spirits, he says to the disciples, as the Father has sent me, so I send you. And with that, he breathes on them and fills them with his Spirit. Yes, this is John's version of the Pentecost story. And he commands the disciples to forgive. It's peace, but with a purpose. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained. So our first lesson regarding how to live in the light of the resurrection involves forgiveness, an instrument of healing, reconciliation, and peace. To offer forgiveness freely as Jesus has offered it to us, even if it is not deserved, and even if it's not even sought or acknowledged. For retaining sin, whether our own or those of others, retains the hurt and imprisonment of misunderstanding and injury in our own spirit every bit as much as in another's. And by not forgiving, we surely have no peace.